Oh boy, people are mad. Hey guys, Ryan here, and I just got done watching the Ambetter 400 at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and my, what a race. And based on the intro, I think we should probably get into the finish here first, so we are going to go ahead and start by putting the results up over there on the screen, and then we will get into the kind of lap by lap recap as we go later into this video. But yes, NASCAR kind of shot themselves in the foot with the poor decision at Daytona and earlier this weekend in the Atlanta race for the NASCAR Xfinity Series, where they allowed both of those races to run back to the line, leading to a lot of people, myself included, thinking that this was just setting the new precedent, especially after the Daytona weekend, where there were a lot of races finishing under the yellow flag, and fans on Twitter being very unhappy with the way that finish was. Even though I thought it was the right decision from the start. Yeah, it was annoying that Eric Jones lost his dual win because of a caution within 50 feet of the line. And yeah, sure, you would much rather see a race finish under green, but at least it was consistent. It was consistent with everything NASCAR had been doing the last 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years, going back further and further. I couldn't find a situation where they really held the caution for a super extended period of time. Maybe a couple at one instance here or there, but then we had back-to-back races. The NASCAR Cup Series race at Daytona for the Daytona 500, and then the Atlanta race yesterday in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, both of which had massive crashes down the back straightaway, both of which the leaders were allowed to race back to the checkered flag. One thing I've seen, and I didn't happen to notice it myself prior to the live stream that I did where I streamed the race, but apparently the president of SMI said that they were going to call this if the same type of wreck happened again. So again, if I'd heard that, I would have been way more understanding that this was definitely going to get called as a caution. As we had 3 drivers coming off the corner, all side by side. We were setting up for a very similar 3-wide finish to what we had in yesterday or in last year's spring Atlanta race, where we had Suarez, Blaney, and Kyle Busch coming across the line. It would have been Bell, Hocevar, and Larson coming across the line all together. Ultimately, though, the cars crashed behind them, and basically everybody fourth on back was at risk of getting wrecked. So again, they threw the caution, and again, I think it was the right decision for safety. And if it wasn't for the Daytona 500 and the Xfinity race being allowed to run green to the end, I don't think we see half the amount of outrage that we see, especially if Christopher Bell, who would have been the winner at 99% of the time through the corner, or through this, had also won the kind of race to the line. Or again, if they just called those 2 other cautions, it probably should have been. Ultimately, again, this just comes down to NASCAR. They need to. I said this after the Daytona 500. They needed to pick a precedent and stick with it. If you're going to let them race to the line, that should be the precedent going forward. I don't like that precedent. I do think that's the wrong decision. Or you need to let them know and intend on throwing the caution every time, whether it ends the race or not, because you need to get safety equipment out there as quickly as possible, which I think is the right call. But regardless of what I think is the right or wrong call, I think you need to pick one and stick to it. And hey, if it goes poorly, that is on whoever makes that decision, and they need to take responsibility for it if something goes wrong and they choose to try and race it back the line. And if they choose to not, they have to be willing to accept it. Yeah, fans probably won't be overly happy with the decision, but you're never going to have everybody 100% happy. So I just wanted to get that part out of the way here first because, again, I knew it would come up when we talked about it, and again, I kind of mentioned it in the intro, but yeah, so Christopher Bell wins this race at Atlanta. The Toyotas were completely a no-show today up until about halfway through the third stage when we had some real pit strategy occur where where some of the drivers came to pit road just before the end of stage 2 and then stayed out at the stage end to ultimately flip the strategy and essentially mix it up, and that's what started to split up the Penske's, which was ultimately the biggest challenge of the day because the Penske's did dominate. Obviously, you don't see very many of them in here, and we will get to that. But Christopher Bell, he put on a very good second half drive, especially in that final stage. He put on a great show. Him and a couple of the other Toyotas started to finally get their rhythm again about 30, 40 laps to go, and they ran a very good final stint of this race. I don't think they were the best cars all night, but at a super speedway, you need to just be running good enough to keep yourself in position, and sometimes the cards will fall where they will, and Christopher Bell was on the right side of luck tonight. He gets the win. Carson Hocevar inches away from what could have been a first career win for the second-year driver, driving that number 77 for Spire Motorsports. Hocevar seems like such a good guy. Again, he apologized to Rick Hendrick and Team Chevy because he did push the 20 to victory lane, or to the victory because of the caution. Now, if that race had run green to the checker, sure, he probably could have, throughout the corner, been able to make his way down and end up pushing Larson or get himself to victory lane. But, again, we had no idea that there was going to be a caution called because they had not called one the last two races where we had cautions near the end. So, again, we just didn't know what NASCAR was going to do. So, Hocevar played that as best he could. He comes home with a second-place finish, and ultimately, I am perfectly fine with that, and I think he should be very proud going into the next race. Then we go to Kyle Larson, who we'll talk about the controversy, but Kyle Larson comes home with a third-place finish. He and the Hendrick boys probably had the second strongest day, besides some of the Penske's, which again we'll get to. I think Kyle Larson, Alex Bowman, and William Byron, that three-car effort put together the best performance of any non-Ford team out there. Ultimately led to Kyle Larson having the lead on the final restart after a controversial incident where Kyle Larson, in his own words, first off, he's self-admittedly not the best super speedway racer, and that's evident to anyone who has eyes and watches these races. But also, in his own words in his post-race interview, he just got a little lazy off the corner, which put him running the number 2 car of austincindric up into the fence, which set up the final overtime restart. And again, I am glad that Kyle Larson didn't win because of that move. It's one of those things where when you have a driver who has a controversial issue like that, you just don't want to see them win the race on the move like that. Again, after this weekend, there will be no further hate towards Kyle Larson, but I did not want to see him win on a move like that, and there have been a number of other incidents like that, and one of those other drivers we'll get to in a minute that have made the same move, and again, you hate to see them win it when they go and make a move like that. Ryan Blaney. He was one of the 4 Penske cars that was basically controlling the entirety of this race, although he didn't lead very many laps on the day. I believe he only led like 10 to 12 laps, but he ultimately comes home in the 4th position, best finish of the Penske cars after Joey Logano got shuffled out during the cycling of pit stops. He got shuffled to mid-pack and was never able to recover. The other 3 Penske cars were able to recover, but then they got taken out in the late race incidents like Cindric, who we just talked about. Ryan Blaney able to survive all of that, coming home in the 4th position. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. coming home in the 5th position. He had a nice, quiet day. No, for a super speedway ace like himself, I thought he might be setting himself up to potentially end up in victory lane. But ultimately, Stenhouse has a nice, quiet day in 5th place, and for the most part, I think he stayed out of a lot of issues. There was one wreck that he was involved in, where the driver, he was on the bottom of what at the time was 2 wide, and it was about to become 3 wide. The driver on the inside line made contact with Ricky, which sent him up the track as Chase Elliott was coming, which forced him to obviously send Chase Elliott up into the fence, and then Elliott ricocheted back down the track, collecting Corey LaJoie and collecting Brad Keselowski. Again, in the moment, I was a lot more upset with Stenhouse than I should have been. I thought he just chose to go up the track. Upon further review of the incident, there was contact. He had no control as to how high he went, and he had no idea. I don't think that there was another car coming. And Chase Elliott, I think for the most part, was along for the ride. Again, I don't really understand the turning the car back down into Corey LaJoie, but at that point, again, he was pretty much along for the ride after the amount of contact he'd had between him and Stenhouse and then him and the wall. Yeah, again, Elliott was along for the ride, but again, I think nothing against Stenhouse on that one. That was just a wrong place, wrong time. But because it's Chase Elliott, I'm sure there's going to be at least some people attacking him for it. So I just wanted to come out here and say Stenhouse didn't do anything wrong there. Denny Hamlin. So speaking of drivers who have had a history of getting lazy and running people wide, Denny Hamlin running Kyle Larson wide at Pocono is one example a couple years ago. But again, I try not to hold on to that beyond it, but it happens to be a coincidence or a good example of when some of these drivers have seen this happen before. Denny Hamlin having a good 6th place finish. Again, the Toyotas were completely anonymous basically until about halfway through the 3rd stage. But Denny ultimately got up there again, similar to Christopher Bell, ran that nice final stage and was able to get there. Kyle Busch had a very solid race. He ran very well throughout the entire thing. Was right there, probably the next best, right in that same group, along with the Hendrick cars, as to the next best car. But the problem is he just wasn't as good as the Penske Fords up ahead of him, and he didn't have the teammates that the Hendrick cars did. Once Austin Dillon got up there, and once he was able to work with Carson Hocevar, once you had that 3-car team basically working on that, Kyle Busch was way more able to attack, but for whatever reason, Austin Dillon just never wanted to get on the back bumper of Kyle Busch. I don't know why he didn't want to push, but ultimately that ended up hurting Kyle Busch's restart performances on some of those, and he ends up coming home in the 7th position. Still a top 10, but just one of those days where you know that there could have been so much more on the line for Kyle. Ross Chastain had a really good race coming down to the end. He was one of those drivers in contention. I believe he got some contact during, I think it was the Cindric wreck, but yeah, he managed just to get a little bit of contact late, but still able to return up into the top 10. And Ross Chastain ran a very good race. Similarly, Bubba Wallace, he qualified as the best Toyota on the day. Yeah, he put up. Yeah, he and Tyler Reddick were some of the only Toyotas we saw putting up a fight throughout the early part of the race, and the two of them stayed in and around the top 10, top 15 most, if not the entire day, and coming home with the top 10 is great for Bubba. John Hunter Nemechek, another driver who desperately needs points because we know these teams, once we get to the real racetracks, not Atlanta, not Daytona, we know that these teams like Spire Motorsports, like Legacy Motor Club, like Front Row Motorsports, will likely need to either win or be very, very, very good in points to make it up there. And being able to run inside the top 10, top 15 at points is a good start for John Hunter Nemechek to start to turn that around. And again, good performances can hopefully upgrade to better performances later on. But again, solid top 10 for John Hunter Nemechek. And again, far better than I think most people expected out of him. Zane Smith is the highest front row motorsports driver. I believe he was the only front row motorsports driver. No, Gillen did survive. Okay, I thought Gillen might have gotten knocked out in that crash, but no, Gillen hung on as well. But Zane Smith, the top finishing front row motorsports driver. Gregson got in a wreck, so good to see that the front row motorsports boys still came back to a good finish. Speaking of coming back to a good finish, Joey Logano, again, he got cycled out in green flag stops and could never really find his footing again. But the big crash on the final lap, in addition to the crash that took out his teammate, Austincindric, he was able to make his way up through the field a little bit and ended up with a 12th place finish. Then we get to another one of my favorite guys, Michael McDowell. Early in the race, we didn't find out until like 100 laps in that he had a power steering issue on like lap 3 or 4 or something like that, and he came in, went 3 laps down, getting that fixed. Came back out onto the track, was basically 2-3 laps down most of the evening before he finally manages to get his laps back and runs all the way up to the top 13. And again, a very good day for what was shaping up to be a really rotten day for Michael McDowell. AJ Allmendinger, he was another one of those top Chevys in qualifying, so good on him for that. Ultimately just survives what was a chaotic day in 14th place. And yeah, nice solid run for Allmendinger. Hopefully, as we're going to a road course next, he'll have a good shot to try and compete for a win. And then the final driver we're going to talk about here in the rundown of the leaders is going to be Todd Gilliland. He was easily the best. He was just like a 5th Penske car out there. He was able to race right in and around Ryan Pre, or not Ryan Pre, sorry. He was able to run right in and around Ryan Blaney, Austincindric, Josh Berry, and Joey Logano. He was able to mix it up with them. He was able to challenge them at times, although because he was essentially one car against the other 4, he never really had the momentum or the effort to go ahead and actually pull a lead over the in-house Penske cars, but he showed that he had just as much strength in his car as them, and he was able to work with them very well, especially in the first half of the race. And just a bummer that late race contact didn't allow him to maintain a top 10, but coming home top 15, not bad for Gilliland. And again, a great weekend for Front Row Motorsports after they got all 3 cars into the top 10 in qualifying. To have 2 cars inside the top 15, certainly nothing to scoff at. So this race was a tale of about 2 to 3 different races. So let's start with race number 1, which was the early part of the race. It was a nice, clean race. No cautions in the entire first stage. Ran completely clean, 60 laps straight to the checkers. Very clean, and it was honestly, it was definitely different than what we see at Daytona or Talladega. But honestly, I think I enjoyed this more than I typically enjoy the chaos at Daytona or Talladega. I mean, yeah, it was anywhere between 1 to 2 lines, but you actually saw drivers be able to actually try and make runs, and some drivers on their own, depending on if their car was strong enough, could just flat out make a run and get to the inside of drivers and be able to side draft their way across. We saw that in the finish of the truck race. Again, not talking too much about the truck race, but Kyle Busch put on a performance there in the truck race, got the win there. So off of the same type of side drafting that we saw used a lot throughout that first stage and a half. And really, we didn't have our first caution for contact until midway through stage 2, I mean. So then after that, then we kind of devolved into the tire issue portion where most notably we had Ty Dillon who had a single car spin, which led to a tire explosion, which ripped apart his front end. Ultimately, I don't think it was the tire that sent him spinning. So I never really saw a great view as to what actually caused him to spin. But I don't think the tire was faulty. But it is concerning that the tire popped that easily. Then we saw Eric Jones also go around, which we later were able to find out from replays that it was off the nose of Chris Buescher. But he also had a massive tire blowout in the rear of the car, and ultimately both he and Ty Dillon got beached and were towed to the garage area, which Ty Dillon was a little bit surprised to find out that apparently with the new rules that allow the drivers to actually repair their cars under the repair their cars in the garage to get back out. If you're beached for any reason, even if it is, like in Ty Dillon's case, only because of the tire, you're automatically towed to the garage area. Again, that was news to Ty Dillon, but apparently, according to some people who actually have access to the NASCAR rulebook and have read it, apparently that is how it is spelled out. So NASCAR played by the rule, and I think they got that one right. Then we start to devolve into the, I would say, third style of race that we had, which was the caution slash cycling of pit strategies, where we had a caution right before the end of stage 2 with about, that was going to send us green with about 5 laps to go. So we saw basically the back half of the field, about 15th to 20th on back, the guys who didn't think they could make it into the top 10 for stage points, all come to pit road, and all of them taking those tires and fuel and getting ready for the restart at the end of the stage. Then we go and run the stage out. Kyle Larson wins stage 2. And then that front 15 or then that front 10, 15 or so, they go to pit road, get their service, and then all of a sudden guys like Joey Logano and Kyle Larson, who had been at the front a lot of the day, were suddenly at the back and having to fight their way through the traffic. Now, stage 3 was full of a lot more caution, so there was opportunities for some of those drivers to get, who were able to make ground on restarts, to be able to make up some of those things. But ultimately, again, some of those drivers like Joey Logano got stuck in the back of the field and really struggled to ever recover until we got into the fourth and final act of the race, which is your typical superspeedway wrecking chaos, which is not my favorite part of superspeedways. And based on what we saw this week and at Daytona last week, definitely seems like the wrecking drivers is just wrecking cars near the end of the race is just as prevalent as ever. And I think I stick by something that I think I said last week. I wish we didn't have these two races back to back. I mean, reorganize the schedule however you need to. Maybe put the West Coast races. Well, I say West Coast races. The non-East Coast races, like Circuit of the Americas in Texas, the Las Vegas and Phoenix races, put those right after Daytona. If you need to move some things around, just to try and get a little bit of distance between Daytona and Atlanta, because of the fact that both tracks are so similar to each other. I feel like it creates a lot of groupthink and a lot of kind of mixing the two races together. Like, again, how we're going to, for the next 8 months or whatever, we're going to talk about how these finishes back to back of the whether you throw the caution or not thing is going to be a conversation. If there were a couple of normal races like at Circuit of the Americas, and let's just say we have a good clean race at Vegas and Phoenix where the yellows at the end of the race aren't a topic of conversation, then we go into Atlanta and we probably aren't even talking about that as one of the storylines of the race, because it's not directly associated with what happened the week prior. So that's something I would like to see probably change, would be just space out the super speedway races a little bit. Don't run 2 plate tracks back to back. I mean, best case scenario, I guess you'd have to try and move it back, and then you at least have one in each month. So you have the 500 in mid February. Then you try and have the Atlanta race in early to mid March, and then you don't have another super speedway until late April. It's still one a month, which is a lot to kind of front load the season. Maybe you try and move Talladega further back, but I don't know. Again, that would take a lot of finagling to try and figure out exactly when to move some of those. But I think the easiest thing to do would just be to move Atlanta back a couple of weeks, and move up the West Coast swing. Again, to try and balance out and space out the super speedways just a little bit. But ultimately, I do think, again, just one last time, I'm going to refresh the thoughts on the finish. I think they got the call right, but the biggest thing that I think me and a lot of other fans are going to be asking for tomorrow and in the weeks leading up to the next race the next several races is going to be consistency when it comes to yellows called on the final lap. Because, again, if you're going to call it, in my opinion, wrong or in the unsafe direction of race it back to the line, make that the policy and officiate that way each and every time. Or if you're going to make, in my opinion, the right or the safe call and throw the yellows, you should be throwing the caution every single time. And I did see the Cup Series race director was on a podcast earlier this week, basically explaining that he feels like he shouldn't have thrown a caution for the dual race number 2. And I agree that I think that one, in an ideal world and looking back on it, yeah, you probably could have let that one go if there was one to let go. But the 500 and last night's NASCAR Xfinity Series race were not races to let slide. So, again, I think overreacting to both Twitter and potentially your own retrospective on the dual race number 2. But again, I think that they got the call right for the Cup race tonight. So I'm not upset. I'm just a little disappointed. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you guys did enjoy this video, feel free to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you guys are new, so you guys don't miss any future videos or live streams. Something I forgot to do in my last video, but up over here, I'm going to go ahead and start in every single one of these race recaps. Going to go ahead and put up a quick banner of all my Patreon subscribers and YouTube members. So if you guys are a member over here on the channel, one, you'll get these videos a bit early, a few hours earlier than everybody else. And you'll get your names on this banner at the end of the videos as well. So, again, I will try to not forget that going forward. But until next time, hopefully you guys enjoyed. And I will see you guys in the next video, live stream, whatever you guys decide to do with the rest of your night. Have a great night, everybody.